Open a map of Russia right now, and you are looking at a lie. Not a small lie, not an error, not a forgotten piece of history. An estimated 44 cities home to more than 1.5 million people are missing. Not abandoned, not destroyed, missing on purpose. By design. For decades, and in some cases still today. Russia is the largest country on Earth, 11 time zones wide, stretching from the edge of Europe all the way to the Pacific. Its scale alone is difficult to comprehend. Plains that run for 1,000 miles before they become forests. Mountain ranges that rise and disappear again beyond the horizon. A single lake holding nearly 1/5 of all the unfrozen fresh water on Earth. This is a country so vast that hiding something inside it almost seems inevitable. But what was hidden here wasn't a mountain. It wasn't a lake. It wasn't a secret bunker. It was people. Entire cities. Schools. Hospitals. Grocery stores. Generations of families. Built. Populated. And then erased. From every atlas, every road sign, every official record the state allowed the public to see. They were given numbers instead of names. Arzamas 16, Chelyabinsk 65, Krasnoyarsk 26. Cities that, as far as the Soviet census was concerned, did not exist. The world only learned about most of them after the Soviet Union collapsed. And some of them the public still doesn't officially know the names of. In this documentary, we're going looking for them. What they were built to hide. Who paid the price for that secrecy? And why more than 30 years after the Iron Curtain fell, dozens of these cities are still closed today? Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. Here is how you erase a city without ever bulldozing it. In 1993, the system was formalized. These places were renamed Closed Administrative Territorial Formations, or simply ZATO. On paper, they were ordinary municipal districts. In reality, they were anything but ordinary. Many of them were built using forced labor from Soviet labor camps, then later handed over to scientists, engineers, and military families. Instead of a name, each city was given a number. And those numbers were intentionally misleading. Chelyabinsk. 40 wasn't actually in Chelyabinsk. It was a closed nuclear city built near a town called Kyshtym. Established in 1948, its purpose was simple. Produce plutonium, tritium, and enriched uranium. Fuel for the Soviet weapons program. But this is where the story gets stranger. Even today, residents need special permission from Russia's security services just to bring a non-resident relative into the city. Permanent access is usually reserved for two groups: people born there, or people who work there. Leaving was never the difficult part. Talking was. Once outside the gates, residents were forbidden from saying where they actually lived. Break that rule and you could face criminal prosecution. In exchange, these cities became the technical backbone of the Soviet weapons program. Chemical research, biological research, nuclear development, missile technology, even space programs. All happening inside places the rest of the country was told did not exist. On the evening of September 29, 1957, people living near the Chelyabinsk region looked up and saw the sky glow an unusual shade of blue and violet. Many assumed they were witnessing a strange kind of northern lights. They were not. Inside a place that officially did not exist, an underground tank filled with highly radioactive waste had exploded. The explosion happened at a facility called Mayak inside Chelyabinsk, 40. A city that, according to the Soviet state, did not exist on any map. The blast launched radioactive material nearly a kilometer into the atmosphere. The fallout eventually spread across more than 20,000 square kilometers, an area home to roughly 270,000 people. But this is the part almost nobody talks about. Within days, people living in the contamination zone were ordered to destroy everything: their livestock, their crops, their land. No explanation was given. More than 20 villages were evacuated, then physically demolished. And because the disaster happened inside a city that officially did not exist, the Soviet government did something extraordinary. It simply borrowed the name of another town. That's why history remembers this as the Kyshtym disaster. Even though Kyshtym wasn't where the explosion actually happened, the truth itself had been relocated. And the secrecy didn't end there. The Soviet government would not publicly admit the disaster had even happened until 1989. 32 years later. By then, an entire generation had grown up without ever knowing what had happened. Today, the Kyshtym disaster is ranked one level below Chernobyl on the International Nuclear Accident Scale. Yet most people have never heard of it. And what makes that even more disturbing is that the explosion wasn't actually the beginning. It was simply the moment the outside world finally noticed. Years before 1957, workers at the Mayak facility had already been dumping radioactive waste directly into the Techa River, the same river nearby villages used for drinking, bathing, fishing, and irrigating their crops. Between 1955 and 1960, thousands of people were evacuated. But the evacuation came far too late. The damage had already been done. And this is where the story becomes truly unsettling. Researchers later discovered that protective measures had been delayed and dangerously inadequate. Decades later, cancer rates near the Techa River were found to be 3.6 times higher than the national average. Birth defects occurred 25 times more often. And this isn't ancient history. As recently as the 2010s, families were still waiting to be relocated, still raising children there, still fighting bureaucratic obstacles, still living inside the consequences of a disaster that officially didn't exist for more than 3 decades. And perhaps the most astonishing part of all, the plant that caused all of this is still operating today. So why does any of this still matter decades after the Cold War ended? Because the system that made all of this possible never actually disappeared. There are still 44 publicly acknowledged closed cities inside Russia today, home to roughly 1.5 million people. And experts believe another 15 or so may still exist, their names and locations never publicly disclosed. But this is where the story stops being about maps and starts becoming about people. Because when governments become good at hiding places, they often become good at hiding consequences too. Rashida Fatahova was 83 years old when she finally began speaking publicly about what she witnessed. As a young woman, she lived in the village of Musliumovo, a place forever tied to the Techa River. After the contamination, many ethnic Russian communities were relocated. The Tatar families living beside them were not. They continued drinking from the same river, bathing in the same water, and growing food in the same soil, while everyone else was being moved to safety. This wasn't an accident. Someone made that decision. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. Soviet scientists eventually began referring to these communities as a natural experiment, an opportunity to study long-term radiation exposure. People were monitored, measured, sampled, recorded, but not relocated. Imagine discovering that your suffering had become data, that your children and your grandchildren had unknowingly become participants in an experiment they never agreed to join. And the secrecy didn't stop there. Doctors themselves were forbidden from telling the truth. Radiation sickness was often recorded under entirely different diagnoses, because writing the real cause on paper would have created evidence. And evidence was exactly what the system was built to erase. But here's the twist. Not everyone inside these cities wanted to leave. In fact, many still don't. Because secrecy came with benefits. Residents earned salary bonuses, reliable healthcare, guaranteed employment, and access to products that were scarce almost everywhere else in the Soviet Union. Imagine growing up behind a fence while living a better life than almost everyone outside it. Eventually, something extraordinary happened. The fence stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like protection. The danger in their minds had moved to the other side. Over time, the system no longer needed to force people to stay. People began choosing it. Polls eventually showed many residents supported keeping these cities closed. Think about that for a moment. 3 generations later, people were asking the state to keep the fence standing. This is where outrage becomes difficult, because there is no single villain anymore. Only a system that became comfortable. And comfort is often more powerful than fear. That is the true architecture of the golden cage. Not concrete, not razor wire, not watchtowers. Inheritance. A captivity so well provisioned that generation after generation helped build its walls even higher. That inheritance does not come free. It never did. And the longer it is passed down, the higher the price becomes, not for the state that engineered it, but for the people living inside it. consider what happened in 2015. Russia's own Ministry for Economic Development drew up a proposal to open just 6 of its 41 closed cities to the public. 6 cities out of 41. The announcement came as a bombshell. It caused immediate and overwhelming indignation, not just among local authorities, but among the residents themselves. People living behind the wire came out against their own city being opened. Not reluctantly, not quietly, loudly, and with conviction. This was not a population straining against its confinement. This was a population that had spent 3 generations internalizing the fence as the condition of its own safety. When the government proposed removing even part of that fence, the response was fury. The proposal was shelved. The cities stayed closed, and the state did not even have to fight for it. It simply waited for its own citizens to do the fighting on its behalf. That is the system operating at the level it was always designed to reach. Not compliance, extracted through force. Not obedience, purchased through fear. But something considerably more durable than either. Dependency that accumulated across 3 generations, so deeply embedded that the people inside could no longer separate the fence from the feeling of home. Soviet-era investment in closed cities ran at between 1.5 and 2 times the per capita rate of comparable open cities, funding elite schools, advanced medical facilities, subsidized housing, and guaranteed employment that ordinary Russian cities could never match. That investment did not simply buy silence, it bought loyalty. It bought a population that looked at the fence surrounding them and saw, not a barrier imposed from above, but evidence that they mattered more than the people who lived outside it. That belief is beginning to cost them something real now. Many of these closed cities were built around military and nuclear technologies that are either becoming obsolete or losing their strategic relevance. In Russia's contemporary economy, the industrial architecture on which these cities were originally built does not translate cleanly into modern market conditions. Business development inside ZATO struggles to gain traction. Residents increasingly describe a creeping stagnation, limited economic opportunity, constrained social mobility, a horizon that effectively ends at the perimeter fence. The material advantages that once made life inside the wire feel exceptional have not kept pace with what life outside the perimeter now offers. The psychological architecture, the conditioning that made residents distrust the external world, has kept pace perfectly. That widening gap between fading material comfort and deeply embedded dependency is where the internal logic of these cities is beginning to crack. Every closed city operates on a budget drawn directly from the federal government in Moscow, entirely independent of the regional authority surrounding it, and disconnected from any local financial process that citizens outside the perimeter can examine. Regional finance officials in areas adjacent to closed cities have described knowing almost nothing about how the nearest ZATO is funded, and in some documented cases, officials have openly denied the city's existence altogether. This is not administrative confusion. This is structural insulation operating exactly as designed. A city that does not appear on a public budget line cannot easily be challenged by a population that has no instrument through which to raise the question. Leave the perimeter permanently, and the city may refuse your right of return to the only home you have ever known. Stay, and you accept the terms of enclosure as a permanent condition of your life, not because anyone forces you to, but because generations of inheritance have made the alternative feel unthinkable. Then 2022 arrived. Cities like Sarov and Zvezny Gorodok had spent years developing limited but genuine cooperation with international research organizations. Narrow, carefully monitored windows of partial transparency that had taken more than a decade of relationship building to establish. Geopolitical tensions abruptly ended almost all of that cooperation within weeks. What had taken years to cautiously open closed again within a month. Scientists lost access without warning. International observers were cut off with no clear timeline for reinstatement. The people who had briefly believed these cities might gradually reconnect with the wider world received their answer. The gates simply closed again. Now bring it back to the river. Bring it back to the woman who never left. Rashida Fatahova spent her entire life beside the water the state poisoned and then refused to name. Her neighbors, the ones who carried the right surnames, were quietly resettled within months of the disaster. Decades later, she was still there. Not because she had chosen contamination, not because she had been given any choice at all, but because the system had made that decision on her behalf, without disclosing it, and without providing a single instrument through which she could have contested it. The cancer rates along the Techa River run 3.5 times the national average. Birth defects occur 25 times more often than in the rest of the country. Those figures are not the legacy of a single explosion. They are the accumulated cost of a decision made in a classified office by people who decided that keeping the population in place was more valuable than relocating them to safety. Then buried that decision inside a medical system that was legally forbidden from writing the word radiation on a death certificate. That is what every layer of this investigation has been tracking beneath the numbers, the code names, and the administrative language. Not the secrecy itself, but what the secrecy was used to protect. A system that placed the continuity of classified industrial operations above the survival of the people living in their shadow, then constructed an entire parallel bureaucracy to ensure that cost would never surface in any record the outside world could read. The wall was never only steel, it was falsified paperwork, rerouted postal codes, budget lines officials were instructed to deny, and death certificates rewritten to protect a facility that did not officially exist. Those structures do not decay, they do not rust, they do not disappear, they adapt, they absorb new legal language, they find new justifications, and they outlast, by a very wide margin, the political system that first commissioned them. Most people believe this story ended in 1991, that the Soviet Union collapsed. The Iron Curtain fell, and secrecy disappeared with it. But that story is incomplete. Because today, 44 closed cities still officially exist. And several more are believed to remain hidden. The Iron Curtain never truly disappeared. It fractured into dozens of smaller, harder to detect, more invisible barriers. And looking too closely at those barriers has become increasingly dangerous. Journalists, scientists, teachers, students, engineers, ordinary citizens. People who investigate too deeply can face severe consequences. This is not a country relaxing its grip. It is a country tightening it. Which brings us to the only question that truly matters. Was all of this planned from the very beginning? Or did secrecy become a habit so deeply embedded that nobody inside the system remembered how to stop? Either way, the wire is not a memory. It is still standing, still operating, still expanding in some places. And somewhere behind it right now, something is being built that you and I are not allowed to know about. If this investigation changed the way you think about maps, history, or secrecy itself, subscribe to Hidden Terrains. Because sometimes the most important places on Earth are the ones we were never supposed to find.